willing witness for a number of occasions, and now that government is back open and the ambassador is in the United States, we appreciate his willingness to testify before our subcommittee on what I think is a really critical topic for our economic and our national security. I appreciate the administration's goal of addressing the trade deficit our nation currently faces, as well as its efforts to ensure U.S. farmers, workers, and manufacturers are able to compete on a level playing field. American tariffs are, however, often met with reciprocal tariffs, and we've seen tariffs force other countries to seek new markets and close their doors to the U.S. entirely. Kansas farmers watch the buyers of their commodities turn to other countries and fear those markets may not return. As harvest season is moving to a close, commodities have piled up with no place to send them. Ambassador, I used to show your predecessor a photo of grain sorghum, and I think I showed it to you when you were in the office. The grain piled as high as a grain elevator in Kansas because there was no market for what we produce because of the ability to export those items and commodity prices. At a time when the cost of production is high and the prices are low, it's hard for time for farmers across the country to see if there's a light at the end of this tunnel. It is important to recognize the progress, and progress is being made by our trade negotiations. The agreements reached and those under discussion provide meaningful incentives to other nations to invest in America and to buy U.S.-made products. This includes bilateral agreements with the EU and UK, which would expand market access for various industries, including agriculture, biofuels, aerospace products that are important in our state. Additionally, prospective deals across Asia will result in increased foreign investment directed toward American communities. I especially appreciate your efforts, Ambassador, to ensure that the tenets of the 1979 Agreement on Civil Aircraft, which eliminates tariffs on civil aviation aircraft engines and their parts and components, is honored in these trade agreements. This is important to ensuring the United States maintain its dominance in this essential industry that provides Kansas, the air capital of the world, with the ability to proudly contribute and to increase the nation's trade surplus in aerospace. During President Trump's first term, he was able to bring Canada and Mexico to the table to renegotiate the North America Free Trade Agreement to the now U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, resulting in significant benefits for North American agriculture producers, workers, and businesses. But at present, many of these deals and agreements seem to be just at their preliminary stages. We hope that there is a swift finalization of these agreements that secure further market access for American goods and decrease our reliance on China. While we've seen meaningful progress, there is still work to be done to ensure the U.S. remain the world's largest economy and a leading global exporter. To complete this work, USTR is requesting its largest budget increase in agency history. The know-how provided by additional expertise will be crucial to ensure these trade agreements get the details right. And Ambassador, as you know, this is an appropriations hearing, and anything that you would like to tell us about your appropriations, past, present, and in the future, we would be happy to hear. Ambassador Greer, again, thank you for your testimony today. I look forward to hearing more about the actions of this administration has taken to improve the outlook on the future of trade negotiations. And Senator Van Hollen, I now recognize you as the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ambassador Greer. I look forward to the conversation about our trade policy and the impact the Trump tariffs have had on consumers and businesses across the United States. And I do want to be clear at the beginning. I support fair trade that protects American workers and benefits American consumers. The American economy is the strongest and largest in the world, and we need access to foreign markets. That's why I support tariffs when they're judiciously targeted and applied to address unfair labor and trade practices. Congress, as you know, has provided a number of authorities to the President to levy such tariffs, but the International Emergency Economic Powers Act is not one of them. I believe the IEEPA tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional, and I'm hoping the Supreme Court will overturn the President's decision. Additionally, the cost to consumers from this administration's trade wars cannot be ignored. Families are paying higher prices for everyday necessities, from groceries to clothing to home goods, because of the Trump tariffs. President Trump acknowledged this risk himself months ago when he said, well, American kids might have to have $2 instead of $30. I don't know what family other than the Trump family and some others, can provide $30 to their kids, but that was an admission by the president of the impact on cost of those policies. And of course, just last month, as part of an effort to reduce prices, the administration lifted the tariffs on staples, including beef, coffee, and bananas. The affordability crisis is not, as the president has recently said, some kind of Democratic hoax. Tell that to people in Maryland and around the country who are feeling the pain. And according to an estimate from the Yale Budget Lab, tariffs could cost the average American household roughly $4,900 a year. And my constituents are reporting to me the pain of additional costs, like the Thanksgiving dinners, where the staple foods comparable to last year's Thanksgiving dinner was about 10% higher. For businesses, the Trump tariffs have created a system that is unpredictable, inconsistent, and ultimately harmful to American interests. Despite the administration's rhetoric supporting U.S. manufacturing, we have shed 78,000 manufacturing jobs this year. We're also seeing an emerging pattern where large, well-connected companies are cutting special lucrative deals for themselves, while small and medium-sized businesses are left to navigate an arbitrary system they cannot afford to influence. In other words, two sets of rules, one for the well-connected that can give expensive gifts to the president, and others that can't. Princess Awesome is a Silver Spring, Maryland-based children's clothing producer. They visited my office after paying over $74,000 in tariffs in just a few months. They've been forced to put tariff bills on credit cards due to the sharp jump in costs. Their primary import, textiles, is not comparably produced in the United States, so they can't pivot to purchasing from a U.S. supplier. And they've been left with no choice but to go into debt or close up shop. And that's just one of many Maryland stories. Of course, in addition, the unpredictability of the trade policies has hurt and paralyzed many businesses. Companies don't know what tariffs will be from one day to the next, making it impossible to make hiring and investment decisions with any kind of certainty. That is bad policy. It's hurting small and medium-sized businesses and the workers that they support. And it's not just that this approach is failing. As the chairman mentioned, in addition to increasing input costs for American manufacturers, we're also seeing retaliation. So, for example, from China, when it comes to agricultural exports, in Donald Trump's first term, President Trump's first term, we had a $28 billion bailout. Just yesterday, the administration announced a $12 billion bailout. I can tell you, Maryland soybean farmers, they don't want the bailout. They just want to be able to sell their products as they had been before the latest trade war began. So, Mr. Ambassador, Americans are paying higher prices. Some are losing their jobs. Some businesses are going under. And at the end of the day, taxpayers are now asked to foot the bill for some of these misguided policies. So I do look forward to the conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this hearing, and I look forward to the questions in the testimony.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Acknowledge the presence of the full committee chairwoman with us today, and we're honored by your presence. But Ambassador, we're ready for your testimony. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Moran and Ranking Member Van Hollen, for having me today. As you know, Senator Moran, I lived in Kansas when I was a young Air Force captain, and Senator Van Hollen, I live in Maryland now, so I'm both your constituents. And I'm glad we're able to finally gather for this hearing after trying to schedule it for some time. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'll focus my brief remarks on the successes of the new reciprocal trade negotiations and, of course, on the resources that the Office of the United States Trade Representative needs to carry out its mission in 2026. I would say thus far this year there's been a large return on your investment in USTR as we've gone around the world securing market access that U.S. exporters and workers have been seeking for decades. I know that many would like to have the prior status quo of the Biden administration with sky-high historic inflation and no effort to get market access anywhere. I know people want to have that, but that is not President Trump's goal. He ran partially on tariffs and correcting the U.S. trade deficit and he won on that platform. And as you know, in April, President Trump imposed reciprocal tariffs in response to the national emergency caused by that trade deficit, which was $1.2 trillion at the end of 2024, which had increased by 40% over the Biden administration. And the result is that we've lost and continue to lose manufacturing capacity that supports our workers and their families, that fuels U.S. innovation, and safeguards our economic and national security. Of course, over the summer, the president paused those tariffs at 10% so we could have negotiations, and we worked through the summer and fall at USTR to negotiate trade agreements with interested trading partners. We announced deals with the United Kingdom and the European Union, both of which have already moved to open up market access for beef, for ethanol, for all industrial products into the EU, for a variety of agricultural goods into the EU. On August 1st, the president further modified the overall tariff structure to account for the forthcoming deals and each country's bilateral trade deficit with the United States. So the structure that came up, absent a reciprocal trade deal, countries where we have a trade surplus have a 10% rate, countries where we have a small trade deficit have a 15% rate, and the larger offenders, with whom we have more pronounced trade deficits, they have higher rates. And throughout the fall, the president announced more trade deals with countries like Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and we signed the first two formal agreements on reciprocal trade with Malaysia and Cambodia during his October visit to Southeast Asia. Cambodia has reduced all of its tariffs for U.S. goods, and Malaysia is in the process of doing so. And since returning, the president's announced additional framework deals with El Salvador, Argentina, Guatemala, and Ecuador, demonstrating the strategic approach to the Western Hemisphere that's focused on expansive new market access and economic and national security alignment with partners in our own backyard. Just last week, I signed the permanent agreement on trade in agricultural products with Israel, and that made permanent a trade deal that previously required annual recertification by Israel. And this deal guarantees our farmers permanent duty-free access to that market, and it further strengthens our ties with an important ally. So these agreements are achieving long-standing U.S. trade priorities, something we couldn't have achieved with the leverage that the president has obtained. For example, 8 countries have committed to ensure market access for current and future U.S. producers using certain meat and cheese terms, even though the EU is going around the world trying to prevent U.S. meat and cheese producers from using them. 11 countries have agreed to accept U.S. automotive emission and safety standards so that our automakers can export freely. 9 countries have agreed to accept U.S. FDA approvals for new treatments and medicines, making American innovation available around the world. We've also received strong commitments from our trading partners to enhance IP protection, provide a level playing field for U.S. companies with respect to their domestic labor and environmental protection standards, and improve coordination on economic security. On top of that, we're working with China, and we've been in continued talks. China has not always been a reliable partner, to say the least. As you know, China this year has controlled rare earths and threatened to do so. This is unacceptable, and so President Trump has been in discussions with the Chinese. Right now, the rare earths are continuing to flow. The Chinese have resumed their purchases of soybeans and sorghum and those other products, and we continue to maintain leverage on the Chinese in the way of tariffs. And of course, all of this is on the condition that China complies with its agreement. The China-U.S. relationship is stable. Of course, we're still quite cognizant of issues related to overcapacity, et cetera. I expect we will continue to sign more trade deals over coming weeks. We're breaking the mold of conventional wisdom in Washington, and it wouldn't be possible without the talented career officials in my office. They're the best at what they do. They layer in all the details that make these deals extraordinary. These career officials have helped deliver on the president's agenda and achieve a more reciprocal trade relationship with our partners, even though, despite having limited resources and support, and facing shutdowns and other things, they've been quite tenacious. Because of this, President Trump has requested that USTR's budget be increased to $72 million for salaries and expenses and $23 million for the Trade Enforcement Trust Fund, a $21 million increase over fiscal year 2025. Our budget has essentially been flat for 5 years, and it's high time to increase this so we can deliver for your constituents. And this will allow us to hire additional trade experts and new personnel to conduct enforcement. And I hope we can work together on this, and I'm happy to answer questions this afternoon.
Ambassador, thank you very much. Let me turn for the first set of questions to the chairwoman of the committee, Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to express my appreciation for your holding this important hearing. Ambassador, welcome. It's good to see you again, and I appreciate the many discussions that we have had on tariffs and the impact on the people of Maine and some of our most iconic industries. Maine and Canada's economies are so intertwined. For example, Maine potatoes, blueberries, lobster, lumber are produced in Maine, but then often shipped across the border for processing and then come back over. Under the USMCA, fortunately, a lot of those products are exempt, including the pulp that is produced in a Canadian mill that is literally across the river from a paper mill in northern Maine, in Madawaska, Maine. And that mill supports more than 500 direct jobs. So it's really important that we have that exemption process. I know that the agreement is under review, and I will just express my hope that you will keep in mind how important the exemptions are to the functioning of many of Maine's most important industries. I do want to ask you, though, specifically about the steel and aluminum Section 232 tariffs. The 50% tariff imposed on imported steel and aluminum is affecting two of Maine's most iconic industries, the lobster industry and the blueberries industry. I recently wrote to you and Secretary Lutnick highlighting the need for relief for both of these important sectors. For the lobster industry, the tariff has increased costs for essential equipment like traps. The blueberry industry, which has had a terrible year, including an overly rainy spring and then a drought during the summer season, is now forced to pay increased costs on critical harvesting and mowing equipment. Earlier this year, the Commerce Department terminated the exclusions process for Section 232 steel and aluminum tariffs, and that was a potential path for relief for these two critical sectors in our economy. Could you talk about whether you are revisiting the specific hardships that are imposed by these 50% tariffs? For example, the sharp knives that are used for certain mowing equipment for blueberries are available only in Canada. It's not as if there is a distributor in Maine or other places that can fill the need for the blueberry growers. Is reopening the exclusions process under consideration?
Well, thank you, Senator, and I also appreciate the conversations we've had in recent months, and I'm always glad to hear feedback on the President's programs. Section 232, as you know, is a Commerce Department program, so I don't control how that's operated. However, I'm happy to raise that with Secretary Lutnick. We regularly hear from domestic producers who are having a large benefit from the program, but we also hear at times folks will come and discuss the effects of the steel and aluminum tariffs on things they're trying to get. I know that the derivatives program is something where folks are trying to understand how that operates, so I'm happy to go to the Secretary and relay your views to him.
Thank you. There is a second issue I want to raise with you, and that is in October, USTR announced a trade framework with Vietnam, which maintained, as I understand it, a 20% reciprocal tariff for imports from Vietnam, and also sought to identify certain products to receive a zero rate. Reaching a fair and balanced trade deal with Vietnam is especially important for Maine businesses like LL Bean, an historic family-owned company in Maine that maintains some manufacturing operations in Vietnam. LL Bean moved out of China and moved a lot of its operations to Vietnam, and would not have anticipated that Vietnam would be the subject of such a high tariff. Has the administration and your office in particular identified a list of products yet that will receive the zero product tariff rate, or a process for determining which kinds of products will receive that more favorable treatment?
Thank you, Senator. So as a baseline, in early September, the President identified a list of products that cannot be grown or physically obtained in the United States because they aren't geologically present or climatologically can't be grown here. He identified those in September as the types of goods where he would provide a 0% reciprocal tariff rate to countries once they conclude their agreements. So that list that came out in November, captures the general universe of what might be there. And this is really agricultural products that can't be grown in the U.S. or minerals and ores that just aren't present in the United States. So that's where we are right now with that. The deal with Vietnam, the final details are still being finalized. I'm happy to have another conversation with LL Bean, regarding their concerns, but that's where we are right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ambassador, a question about the sort of connection between trade policy and national security policy. And you would agree that we should not compromise our national security interests as part of a trade agreement. Would you agree with that statement?
Certainly. Yes, sir.
So I want to talk to you about the affiliates rule. Are you familiar with the affiliates rule?
I am, yes.
Right. So this was a rule, as you know, announced by the administration earlier this year to try to close a loophole with respect to the entities list. The entities list being companies that we say that U.S. companies may not export certain kinds of goods to because they pose a national security risk, right?
It's about affiliates and how you determine who's on the list.
Right. So this was an effort to close a loophole, right? Because let's say Huawei's on the entities list, but Huawei creates a subsidiary that's not on the list. The idea was to close that loophole so we make sure that it's an effective policy.
Well, you can close it by just identifying the subsidiary, which is how it's been for 40 years under Biden and Bush and Obama and everybody.
But this changed it. This has been a work in progress. I mean, this effort to close the affiliates rule was in progress under the previous administration. I'm glad that the current administration continued it. But the president, in his meeting with President Xi in South Korea, decided to postpone the implementation of the affiliates rule. Isn't that right?
So the affiliates rule applies to globally, to everybody, and it was paused globally for everybody.
But he announced that at his meeting with Xi, isn't it?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's right.
And that's when the head of NVIDIA flew over to the meeting. He was in South Korea at the same time, right?
I don't know. I pre-briefed the president, and he wasn't. The CEO of NVIDIA was not in that pre-brief.
Right. So the Commerce Department, BIS, described this, affiliates rule, closing this loophole, as a vital tool for our national security. Would you agree with that description?
I think it would be helpful. Congress did not include it in ECRA that they passed in 2018. It was never, for 40 years, we didn't have that. Congress didn't pass it. We thought it could be a good idea.
Yeah. Well, I do too, and it's been a work in progress. I mean, I supported many of the steps the first Trump administration took with respect to the entities list. The Biden administration actually went further, and then this was the next step. So it seems to have been traded away in the meeting with President Xi. So what happened? What did we get for that?
So on October 9th, the Chinese announced that they were going to control all rare earth materials anywhere in the world. If there was 0.1% of a product that contained rare earths processed or mined in China, they would want to approve it. If we made a chip, if TSMC made a chip in Arizona, the Chinese would have to approve it. This threatens our entire industrial supply chain to have the rare earths be held over a barrel like that. And for years and years and years in the United States, business and policymakers have not solved the rare earths problem. And so we are in a situation right now where we are trying to reindustrialize, and we want to get along with China. We want to get rare earths from China while reindustrialize. We're getting them. We want to try to have good trade relations with China, soybeans, sorghum, aircraft, medical devices, all these things. So it makes total sense to try to have good relations with China rather than blow up the global economy.
I've seen some of your interviews, and I agree with you that there's no reason to have bad relations where it's not necessary. But obviously, we want to protect our national security. And in my view, this was a big mistake. And we can argue about this, but China only took those actions after we got into this trade war with China. But let me ask you about another rule that was waived by the Trump administration, the diffusion rule. Are you familiar with that one?
I have some familiarity with that, with the Biden era diffusion rule.
Well, right. So the Biden era had a diffusion rule that said certain countries where we're concerned that if we send them our highest end technology, that it could actually fall into the hands of our adversaries like China would be on a list, right?
Yeah, they're currently in the country group that
That's
has.
right. And the UAE was one of those countries that the Biden administration had applied the diffusion rule to. And yet the Trump administration, just as the president was leaving for his trip, decided to lift the diffusion rule with respect to the UAE, right?
I think it was lifted, again, it's Commerce Department, but the AI diffusion rule was withdrawn for the world, and we're just relying on the country groups that are already established.
He announced it, right, at the same time that he said that the United States would allow high-end chips and AI technology to go to G42, a UAE-based company, right?
I don't know all the timing because it's a Commerce
Well, it was,
Department
and it turns out that it was just a few weeks before that the president's son, Eric Trump, was in the UAE and did a deal with MGX. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with MGX.
Well, it's important to know because, and I know Senators Merkley and Senator Warren sent you a letter on this when in your capacity as earlier as OGE, but the reality is that a company called MGX provided an investment of about $2 billion into the Trump family crypto coin business, which hugely increased the value of that at the same time that President Trump gave G42 this sweetheart deal transferring U.S. high-end technology. And it turns out, Mr. Ambassador, that the head of MGX and the head of G42, the chair, is the same person. He's part of the Emirati royal family. He's a very good businessman and obviously got a good deal from the President of the United States. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll pursue some of this more maybe in later questioning. Thank you.
Senator Kennedy. Senator Kennedy. No, sir. I am. You've only got 4 minutes left.
We're having friendly banter. Mr. Ambassador, what's the administration's position on AGOA?
So on AGOA, we understand that.
Tell me what AGOA is first.
Sure, it's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. It's been in place for about 20 years, and it gives duty-free treatment to African countries unilaterally, and that's what it does. And over the past 20 years, we've seen, frankly, China move into Africa, and so it makes you wonder if AGOA is functioning how it should. It's expired recently. I've heard from a lot of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. They want to see AGOA renewed. The administration position is that we're open to a one-year clean reauthorization, and we should take that year to work together to find out how to improve it and make it better, rather than just being kind of a giveaway. Is there a way to have enhanced bilateral trade, more export access? Can we deal with the challenges of today rather than whatever we were facing 20 years ago?
Yeah, I noticed, I think it was yesterday, but it was announced that China has a $1 trillion trade surplus. Did you see that?
I did see that. I
Yeah,
follow that pretty closely.
I figured it got your attention, got my attention. And at first blush, you think, well, how did they do that? Because we tariffed a lot of Chinese products. Well, they just went out and sold elsewhere. And they replaced a lot of their sales to us with sales to Africa. In fact, their trade with Africa increased more than it did anywhere else. Did you see that?
I didn't have the specific numbers, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, what does that tell you?
Well, what this tells me, well, on the one hand, you have China that has its own 5-year plans, where
Right.
their whole goal is just to export more and more. Last year, they had about $1 trillion surplus too, so unfortunately, it's not news. What it tells me is that, the United States and others, we need to take actions. Our trade deficit with China went down, and it's going down this year.
Sure.
So we're going the right direction with China. But it means that we need to, if we're going to have a GOA again, we need to figure out how to make it more effective so this dynamic doesn't happen.
Yeah. What are we going to do about South Africa as part of a GOA?
Well,
I mean, South Africa is clearly not America's friend.
That's correct. We've had some conversations with the South Africans when it comes to trade, and again, there are a lot of kind of foreign policy issues that I don't get into with South Africa, but when it comes to trade, they have a lot of barriers, not just tariff, but non-tariff barriers, et cetera. We've made clear to the South Africans that if they ever want to have a better tariff situation with us, they need to take care of these tariffs and non-tariff barriers. They're a real economy, they're a big economy, right? They have an industrial base, they have an agricultural base, they should be buying things from the United States.
But if you extend a GOA for 1 year without reforming it, that's going to benefit South Africa, right?
I mean, it could. I would say we have a 30% reciprocal tariff on South Africa right now, which is much higher than the rest of the continent. So we'll control for it a little bit. But I think South Africa is a unique case. I agree with you, if that's your point.
Don't you think we ought to separate South Africa and AGOA?
I mean, I'm happy to consider that, right? I mean, Congress has come to me and said, we want AGOA. And I think if we're going to have a giveaway, we need to figure out how to improve it. If you think that we should give South Africa different treatment, I'm open to that because I think they are a unique problem.
Well, they're a unique problem for America.
Correct.
I mean, they're our enemy right now. I mean, they're buddies with all of our enemies, and they've been very critical of the United States.
That's exactly right, and that's why they're actually treated in a much different way. Most of the African continent, sub-Saharan Africa, has just a 10% tariff, and South Africa has a 30%.
All right, I've only got a minute left. I want to see if I can hit a big picture item here. A lot of us are concerned about Ukraine and stopping Russia. That's the underpinnings of my question. The president, the administration, I'll say, is in the process of negotiating a trade deal with China. Is that fair?
Yes.
And the negotiations are tough, right?
I agree.
And we've made some progress. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
But we're not there.
Right.
And things are sort of finally balanced in terms of us confecting a deal that's good for America.
Yeah, we're getting the rare earths, we're exporting our ag again, the trade deficit's going down, we're going the right way.
And this is a high priority for the administration, is that right?
It's very high.
Okay, given those circumstances, what is the likelihood that President Trump is going to support the bill to place massive sanctions on China for buying Russian oil?
Are you talking about the Senator Graham bill?
Yes.
So,
which, by the way, I support.
Well,
but we keep talking about like it's a possibility. I'm thinking, on what planet? Not the planet Earth. So you're telling me? I mean, here's my point. You're going to spend the administration spending all this time and work confecting a trade agreement with China, and as soon as you get it done, we're going to blow it up.
Well, what I would say.
I'm not saying we shouldn't, but
sure.
I'm trying to get us to be realistic in the Senate about going to Plan B for dealing with Russia and Ukraine.
Sure. So what I would say is the White House and USTR, we've looked very closely with the Graham bill. I've talked to Senator Graham. I think notionally we support the bill. We've given some technical assistance, et cetera. With China, we have very high tariffs on China already, right? At some point, a tariff, you reach a certain level and beyond it, its relevance becomes a little less, right? But we think it's a powerful bill. It's not China specific. It's really about Russia, and it's about anyone who's buying or would have purchased fuel from Russia. So we see it as something that's really Russia specific, less China specific.
So how come the administration hasn't given us the green light to pass the bill?
You know what? After this, I'll go talk to James Braden, James Blair, and say, what's going on, guys?
Because you understand, we're not going to pass it until the president
Oh, I
Says it's
understand.
okay.
I'll go back and we'll talk about where we are on it because we've been giving technical assistance and we've discussed it internally.
Yeah, I just don't want us to waste any more time on this subject. We need to go to Plan B. Some of us are worried about Ukraine and pushing back on Russia, and there is a Plan B, but we're not going to go to it until as long as we keep dancing around this issue of realistically whether the president really is going to blow up a trade deal with China by giving us the green light to pass this bill.
Well, Senator, one thing I would say is in all of our trade deals, we're keeping tariffs on countries. We modify them, but we're keeping tariffs. So, there's not really a world where we're going to zero tariffs on the whole world, right? And even China, I think, part of our deal is we have some tariffs on them and, they have some restrictions on us. It's a managed trade situation. So I think, and again, the bill, my understanding isn't, you have to go to 500% on the whole world all at once. I think there's some discretion in there. But again, I'll go back to White House Ledge and we'll talk about it and give you an update on where the White House is on that.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And Ambassador, you're aware that importers pay a tariff?
Can you say that again, sir?
You're aware that importers pay the tariff?
The importer of record, that's right.
And then those importers often have to pass those costs on, and they ended up, consumers pay the tariff, and the estimate is over $2,000 a year. Is it good or bad for American citizens that their general family is going to have to pay $2,000 plus more this coming year?
I disagree with the Yale Budget Lab, who's staffed by former Biden staffers. A lot of times the exporter eats the tariff. The importer of record is.
What's your estimate?
What's my estimate?
Yeah, of how much more consumers are going to pay.
First of all, sometimes it's zero, especially if it's coming from a country that's a non-market economy where they're subsidized and they don't have to worry
But no,
about
the
bottom
average
line.
family in America, you disagree with the $2,400. How much do you think an average family is going to pay more because of the tariffs?
I don't have a number.
Okay, I think it's an important point, and I would think in your role you might have understood that a lot of costs are passed on to the consumer and that's hurting families. I met with a small business a couple weeks ago in Oregon, and they ordered products for their manufacturing, and when they ordered it, the tariff was 10%, en route it was 20%, and by the time they arrived, it was 30%. They probably wouldn't have ordered those particular products if they knew they had to pay 30%. So when tariffs are coming on very suddenly, it imposes unexpected costs on America, and that's particularly challenging for small businesses. Why not give enough notice in advance so that small businesses don't end up in this kind of tariff trap?
So when we impose tariffs, we always include what's called a goods on the water provision to try to at least minimize, some of these changes. That's a real issue. I'm not discounting that. And so if there are goods on the water for several weeks beforehand and they've gone out, that's fine. If you do it earlier than that.
I'll
Yep.
accept your answer that you try to address that, but I've had a number of companies who have told me they have had to pay more when it arrived than when they ordered the product. So maybe there's a way we can improve that piece of the puzzle. And then companies are telling me that they're not making decisions on new factories because of the uncertainty about if it takes 3 years to build a factory, what the tariffs will be at that point, and where their customers will be. Have you observed and are you familiar with the fact that a lot of investment decisions are on pause because of the rapid changing nature of the tariffs?
Well, anecdotally, I've had some folks come to me and talk about that. When I look at the data, the objective data, we're seeing private investment increase. We're seeing consumer consumption quite robust. So the data shows that things are still continuing. But I hear anecdotes like you're saying.
I acknowledge your point on the consumer side, but on the investment side, that is not what I've seen in the studies. I'll be happy to submit some information for the record on that. And then the net effect year to date, the November estimate covering year through August was the last numbers we had. Did the trade deficit go up or down year over year?
There was a lot of front running, so it's gone up. When you look at since August, September, it's gone down. And it's certainly gone down with respect to China.
Yeah, we did see a drop in September, point taken. But for January through August, year over year, it's a 25% increase in the trade deficit. And I hope you're right that it will continue to go down, but a lot of folks, because of the tariff uncertainty, pre-ordered products, and therefore it's not unclear whether that is simply a dip in how much they're importing at this point because they had already invested before. Finally, my farmers, they are not happy. And they're not happy because a lot of their markets have been disturbed. We don't have the soybeans, so we don't have that kind of big crop. We have a lot of crops where people are uncertain what to plant next spring because they're not sure where the customers will be. And this is part of that instability factor. And are you familiar with how the ag world, I know you're trying to bail them out because of the damage done, but are you familiar with how many different parts of the ag world are feeling a lot of stress because in some cases the tariffs increased some of the inputs like fertilizer or so forth, but they're also stressed about what will their markets be next year because they're uncertain of the up and down.
So with respect to the farmers, I talk to them very frequently. I have a chief agriculture negotiator who hopefully will be confirmed by the Senate in coming days. You know, on the one hand, we know that interest rates for farmers, labor costs, fertilizer costs skyrocketed during the Biden years. Hopefully those are coming down now. We have gotten more market access for farmers for Oregon hazelnuts and blueberries and horticultural products. So if they want the market access, we're getting it. You know, if folks don't want the market access, they want it, and we're getting it for them. And that's going to create higher commodity prices so they can export. You know, the only country that retaliated against us was China. It's a big country, but no one else retaliated against us. Everyone else negotiated, and most of them has given us new market access, and we hope that the farmers will be able to take advantage of that. We've seen Vietnam reduce tariffs already. Cambodia's eliminated it. The EU, Switzerland, they've already put their legislation.
Well, part of my role is simply to convey what the folks back home have asked me to convey, and my agricultural community is very stressed. My small businesses are very stressed as well. They're saying Main Street is Pain Street, and it's both healthcare costs and it's tariffs. I'm closing now, but I'll just say when I look at this, consumers, a family paying over $2,000 more, investment decisions on hold because of the uncertainty. The trade deficit has increased for the year. It looks to me like it's not serving America well. That's my concern. Thank you.
Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Greer, nice to see you today. Welcome. Yesterday, I was at the White House as the President announced $12 billion in bridge payments to our farmers. And it's no secret that the farm economy is in a tough place right now. There are very high input costs. We're looking at, obviously, adverse weather conditions across much of farm country. So I am glad and thankful that the President did provide this assistance. However, ultimately, what Nebraska farmers want are markets to sell their products. And I know you're working on that, especially for our soybean farmers. The deal that you negotiated with China in November, it was very welcome news, and we have seen soybean prices increase since then. But there remains anxiety about if and when China will fully follow through on those purchase commitments that were made. The White House fact sheet on the deal stated China would purchase at least 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans during the last 2 months of 2025. And that was followed then by 25 million metric tons over the next 2 years. Ambassador, over the weekend, I saw that you made comments about China being on pace for these purchases this growing season. Can you walk me through how you are monitoring China's purchases and what is the timeline for the 12 million metric ton purchases? Is that timeline not by the end of this calendar year?
It is for this growing season, so thank you for highlighting that. We've heard from a couple farmers. They wanted to know about that discrepancy. And it is a discrepancy. It's through the growing season, which is, again, when we usually expect soybeans to be sold through the growing season. You know, how are we monitoring it? I mean, on a nearly daily basis. We're checking with, USDA has their statistical services and reports. I personally have contacts in Asia, soybean traders who give me updates, and so I'm verifying, between what I'm hearing from Asia, what we're seeing in the stats and the data, and the same
How's
goes.
it look?
So we're at about 3 million metric tons of beans so far. We think they're on track through the growing season to do this. We do want a large amount in the first couple of months. The president himself is engaged on this. He talks to President Xi and he raises this. I mean, this is an area where China should be buying from us. We have all kinds of areas where we want to manage trade with China. We worry about what we buy or what we sell to them, but ag is someplace where we should sell and they should buy. That should be the most robust part of our relationship.
Okay, thank you. I also want to discuss with you about the impact tariffs have had on some manufacturers that we have in the state of Nebraska. I strongly support the goals of strengthening manufacturing in our country, and while I know that tariffs have helped some industries, others have really suffered. Like many of my colleagues, I've heard from several manufacturers that have a long time, significant presence in Nebraska that they are being harmed by tariffs to the point of having to consider layoffs. And unfortunately, many have already done so. For many of these businesses, the challenge is the products that they are manufacturing are competing in a global environment. When they are having to pay an increased cost for materials and inputs, yet their competitors are not, they are at a really competitive disadvantage. For example, one manufacturer in Nebraska has competitors that manufacture in Canada. They don't pay the tariffs for similar materials, yet they can send their product duty-free into the United States under the USMCA. I know the intent of these tariffs is to support our domestic manufacturing. We all support that. We all want to see that continue to grow. And I'd like to ask if I can follow up with you and your team and walk through some of the challenges that are facing these specific businesses, and hopefully we can figure out some solutions and ensure that these tariffs are not having a number of unintended consequences. So I look forward to being able to have those conversations with you.
Of course, Senator, we're happy to discuss it. Thank you.
Thank you. As I've been discussing some of the challenges facing our manufacturing industry, I also want to recognize some positives that we have from these trade deals that have been announced. In particular, the foreign investment commitments from other countries, I think, have a huge opportunity to help reshore some of these critical supply chains over time. And a number of the companies have located to my state that could benefit from strategic investment partnerships. So as we see these foreign investment partnerships from countries are being negotiated as part of a deal, can you talk about how the administration is working to help connect these American companies with foreign companies in order to achieve this?
Certainly. So the Commerce Department is really assisting in the inbound investment. They have an investment accelerator unit at the Commerce Department that is designed to assist foreign companies that are coming in to make sure they understand the permitting scheme, to connect them with potential investment opportunities. So we're happy to connect any businesses or investment opportunities you have with the Commerce Department.
Good. I think there's a lot of opportunities ahead for us. But we just have to stay on track to understand what maybe some of the challenges are that we face and then push forward so we can get this done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Vice Chair Murray.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing today. I want to thank both the chair and the ranking member. I know when it comes to trade and tariffs, this committee has strong bipartisan concerns, so I'm glad that we have the opportunity to hear directly from you today, Ambassador Greer. President Trump promised to lower costs on day one. Instead, he did slap these unprecedented new taxes on nearly everything that Americans buy from abroad. And now that prices are rising, he's calling affordability a Democratic scam. Well, Ambassador, let me just ask you, yes or no, do tariffs raise prices for American consumers?
I don't think they do. When you look at all the data, I think they have a very limited impact.
Well, I disagree, and Secretary Bessent said on Fox News that exempting products from tariffs would, quote, bring the prices down very quickly. Wouldn't that mean then that tariffs increase prices?
I think, again, the general answer is no. I think with some of those products he was referencing, bananas, coffee, things we don't necessarily make, there you're going to get more of a chance of a price impact from tariffs. Other stuff that we make or have a lot of producers, you don't have the flow through. But I think with those, you could see an impact. So.
Well, I think my consumers, people in my state, are seeing price increases, and they know what's happening. I don't see how anybody with a straight face can't say that tariffs raise prices, but somehow ending them lowers the prices. So I think we all need to be honest. Now, in April, I visited a local candy company in my home state in Tacoma, Washington. They're called Brown and Haley. They have been in business for 112 years, and they employ 150 people. They are known for almond roca, which they export to 65 countries in the world. Brown and Haley told me that Trump's tariffs and trade wars have cost them half of their export business, half. They worked hard for years to become a net exporter to China. And then Trump's trade war came along and their China exports dropped to zero. Now, to keep their business alive in China, they have been forced to license their brand to other products made in China and literally helping Chinese manufacturers at the expense of the American ones. You're their trade representative. What have you done to ensure that American small businesses who rely on sales to China are able to sell their products and grow the economy here at home?
So a couple things. First of all, we're opening market access all over the world in places like Southeast Asia and even in Europe, places where everyone thinks we've had market access for a long time, but we haven't. So we're opening billions and billions of dollars of markets. I'd be interested in talking to the company that makes almond roca. I think that's that is news to me that they had an issue in China.
Well, they're one of many in my home state and actually in this country who are facing the same kind of thing. And in fact, we have farmers and growers who are trying to expand into other markets, as you well know, and they're being thrown one-time limited relief. But our small businesses and our farmers want to trade. They don't want aid. And they tell me that this is really creating chaos, including Brown and Haley, but other companies as well. And I'd love to have you take a look at that because it has had a serious impact to them. Now, I do understand tariffs can be strategic, but there seems to be no strategy to me when it comes to this trade war. And coffee is a great example. We consume nearly 800 times much coffee as we produce, as you know. I doubt that's going to change anytime soon, and I'm glad that coffee is now exempt from some of these tariffs, but I cannot understand why this administration forced Americans to pay higher for months. Tell me, what did the coffee tariffs actually achieve?
So, first of all, coffee prices were going up for 2 years. I can't affect the weather in Brazil and these other places. Second of all the tariffs that were imposed, some of them are in place to protect domestic supply chains. Some of them were in place for leverage. So in early September, the president announced that he was going to take the tariffs off of coffee and bananas and other things. And then once we had the deals with the kind of countries that send us coffee and bananas, Ecuador, Vietnam, Indonesia, et cetera, then we had used that leverage and we removed it.
Why did it take so long to exempt coffee?
Well, because TPP was negotiated for 8 years under Obama, and it never came to fruition. We did deals with Southeast Asia in 6 months to get all the tariffs down. So I think that's really, really fast.
Well, my opinion is those kinds of issues should have been worked out before we slap tariffs on anybody. But let me say this, and I just have a few seconds left. Canada is Washington State, my state's second largest export partner and our largest source of international visitors. And I want you to know this. President Trump's trade war and insults have driven away Canadian visitors to my state and to other states. It has delivered a huge blow to our economy. Passenger vehicle border crossings in my state are down more than 24% in the first 10 months of this year. Spokane, Washington, Eastern Washington, saw a 33% drop in visitors this year. The operator of a ferry between Seattle and Victoria, BC, has been forced to lay off now a quarter of its workforce because ridership is down 30%. In my state, Americans are losing their jobs and our businesses are struggling. And I just really believe, Mr. Ambassador, we should not be picking fights with our close allies and neighbors like Canada. This trade war has been a terrible blow to American small businesses, and I hope it ends. It has to end. If it could end tomorrow, it would be so much better for my state and so many other people. And I want you to know that, especially with Canada. This is hurting my state.
Ambassador Greer, welcome.
How are you,
Good to
Senator?
see you here today.
Good to see you.
I want to talk first about what's happening in Europe. I was encouraged to see the joint statement on the U.S.-EU trade deal that highlighted the European Union's egregious Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, the so-called CSDDD, and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD. In that particular statement, the EU committed to ensure that these measures do not pose undue restrictions on transatlantic trade and on commercial relations. Yet, despite these assurances, the European Commission has advanced revised proposals that still contain extremely aggressive provisions targeting U.S. companies with extraterritorial rules, civil liability, and climate transition planning mandates. So my question for you, Ambassador, is how does the Office of the United States Trade Representative plan to hold the EU accountable to the commitments that it made?
Well, thank you, Senator. First of all, as you know, the facts show that we've included these commitments in our joint statement, and so they have to deliver on this. They have to accommodate U.S. companies, and the reality is, if the Europeans don't deliver on what they've committed, they won't receive the benefit of the tariff relief they've been granted. That's what this comes down to. And so I actually have a delegation back in my office right now speaking with my staff about this very issue.
Good. Thank you for holding them to account. I think this is extremely egregious, this attempt to overreach as they have. I also want to encourage you to continue looking for non-tariff barriers like this, including these sort of extraterritorial regulations, as you approach your trade agenda. Legislation to block the CSDDD has been introduced in both chambers of Congress, and lawmakers remain very aggressively focused on maintaining United States sovereignty, and your help will be most appreciated there. On a separate note, critical minerals are foundation to the U.S. economy and to our defense industrial base, whether it's semiconductors, electric vehicles, or advanced weapon systems. Yet we're now significantly dependent on China for many of these minerals and rare earth elements, a fact that creates unacceptable vulnerabilities in our supply chains, and it gives the Chinese Communist Party far too much leverage in international affairs. Beijing created this dependence largely through unfair trade practices, like market dumping. These fair trade practices have made mineral production, and especially midstream processing, unprofitable, and they've driven firms in many of our allied nations out of business. So how important is it to solve the unfair trading practices that have helped create and sustain Beijing's dominance in critical minerals?
Senator, this is at the core of what we need to do to reindustrialize. We have to have independent supply chains for these types of goods. You know, I don't know if, you know, China's going to, you know, change their whole program and how they operate, right? They're a sovereign country, they'll do what we want, but we can do things. We can take actions, we can invest. You know, we've done that with the Mountain Pass mine. The government, you know, the administration is looking for many such opportunities to jumpstart that kind of production. You know, private industry is jumping into it. I mean, we have, you know, GM and Ford from Michigan are taking steps. And so we're seeing government, private industry, and other countries find a way to work together to have independent supply chains.
Well, to address this challenge, Senator Cortez Masto and I recently introduced the Restoring American Mineral Security Act. This act will empower the trade representative, yourself, to lead negotiations with our partners to create a critical minerals security alliance. The objective of the alliance is to coordinate tariffs and trade remedies with allied nations, to level the playing field against Beijing's unfair mineral trade practices, and to foster a resilient supply chain for minerals that cannot be used by China to hold our economy hostage. Ambassador Greer, from your perspective, how would having these tools strengthen the USTR's ability to counter non-market practices, to diversify supply chains, and to negotiate more effectively on behalf of the United States?
Well, first and foremost, it sends the right message to our partners and to private industry, et cetera. You know, we're taking steps already on a bilateral basis to negotiate these kinds of things, but I think the kind of tools you're talking about would add, you know, additional authority and seriousness to our process.
Well, I appreciate your help in working together on this. I hope we'll pass this legislation to give you the tools you need to build the sort of resilient networks to protect ourselves on these critical supply chains that are so vital to our national security. I want to thank you again for being here today and let you know that I always look forward to working with you on these important issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Next, I'll call on Senator Peters.
Thank you, Senator Hagerty. Ambassador, welcome to the committee. Good to see you here today. Ambassador, as I know you're fully aware, as part of the USMCA trade agreement, the United States, Mexico, and Canada agreed to review and potentially renegotiate the terms of the agreement beginning July of 26, coming up very shortly. Last month, your office concluded a public comment period which was designed to help guide the office's perspective as you enter this mandatory review. This was followed by 3 days of public hearings last week on the trade agreement, and both these comments and hearings will ultimately assist the drafting of the report to Congress on the posture heading into this review. So, Ambassador, I just want to impress upon you and your team on the importance of open lines of communication between the USTR and Congress during this process. We were able to craft and approve the USMCA in 2020 because of bipartisan collaboration in Congress, as well as tremendous public input that went into that. For that reason, as you approach the start of the review period next summer, I implore you to maintain open and close communication with not only Congress, but businesses, workers, local governments, and other stakeholders to ensure the terms of the USMCA improve, not regress. You and I have spoken about how important trade is, both in Mexico and Canada, the state of Michigan, and having two of the busiest border crossings in North America with Canada. This is something of incredible importance to my state as well as to the country. So my question for you is, what are both your and the administration's priorities as you enter into this review process?
Thank you, Senator, and I appreciate the engagement we've had, and I commit to have my office and myself at disposal of you and anyone else who wants to talk about USMCA and other trade matters. And again, we just finished our public consultation period and hearings, so we're still forming a lot of our views. I can tell you, though, first and foremost, I want to make sure that our trading partners are following their current commitments. We have situations where Mexico is not following all of its commitments. We're working closely with them. They're being pragmatic. We've identified areas where we think Canada is falling down on their commitments. I don't have to talk about dairy too much in this group. Everyone knows. But in addition to compliance with the existing agreement, we'd like to see a situation where the rules of origin really benefit content from the United States and of course from Canada and Mexico. But we want to make sure that the agreement is truly for American workers and American businesses, and that's who it benefits. And that means a conversation about rules of origin. We did it for autos in the first Trump term. My sense is that on non-auto items, we also need to do this. We need to make sure that the terms of the agreement are benefiting American producers and workers. There are a variety of other things we can look at too, but that's one of the key things I'm looking at right now.
And the open communications, we'll be able to talk regularly because this is obviously critically important.
Yes, of course.
Yep. Have your commitment to do that.
Yes, my staff will be available. I'll personally be available if you want to talk to me.
Question for you, are you concerned that the administration's really unprecedented usage of certain emergency powers, specifically IEPA, to impose tariffs both on Mexico and Canada is going to make it less likely that these countries are going to be willing to make the kinds of changes to the trade agreement that are advantageous to our domestic industries, because we have to do a lot more? It seems to set a pretty difficult environment to go into these negotiations. What are your thoughts?
I think it makes it more likely. I mean, the people, these other countries, they don't really respond to moral suasion. They respond to enforcement, and tariffs are enforcement. When we talk about enforcement, it's tariffs. That's how it works. That's how we are able to generate compliance. That's how we're able to generate market opening. Like I said, I've been working with the Mexicans over the past 90 days in the negotiation process for compliance, and they've come a long way. I think that we need to, when we say we want enforcement of agreements, we need to understand that enforcement means you impose tariffs if people aren't complying, and it's quite a motivator.
Well, in February, the Trump administration placed tariffs on Canada in an effort that was claimed related to fentanyl trafficking. You and I spoke about this at the time. And as we discussed, I'm absolutely focused on addressing the threat of fentanyl. It is a scourge that we have to be focused on, and as ranking member of Homeland Security, it's what we do on a daily basis. And any amount of fentanyl crossing the border is too high. I mean, I think we all agree on that. But in reality, very little of the fentanyl entering the United States is actually coming from Canada. So it's unclear why the administration has taken such an aggressive action against one of our greatest allies and friends and trading partners, who have certainly demonstrated a willingness to work on a cooperative basis on border security, something I do regularly with our Canadian counterparts. So how can the administration justify continuing the tariffs that are related to that, since the main consequences are actually increasing prices for Americans, threatening American businesses? We heard from one of my colleagues in particular what's happening in her state as well, when we are working very closely with Canadian border security folks. They are as focused as we are, and yet we're raising prices for Americans.
So in the first place, most Canadian goods come over duty-free because they comply with the rules of the USMCA, which the Senate passed in 2020. Second, and I'm happy to share some of this with you, but publicly, we know that there continue to be giant foreign-funded labs in Canada where they're producing fentanyl, and that is unacceptable. And I agree with you. We work well with the Canadians on border security and fentanyl issues, but they have giant foreign-funded labs in Canada that produce fentanyl, and that has to stop.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to build off of something you just said. You talked about your negotiations with Mexico over the last 90 days and them not making good on commitments and you kind of sort of working through that. Something I've worked with Senator Hagerty on in lockstep is obviously making sure that Vulcan is a top priority of this country's and yours as we have those negotiations. I just want to say thank you. We have to make sure that our American companies are treated fairly, and the way that they have been treated by the Mexican government is egregious. And so I appreciate you keeping that top of mind throughout these negotiations. Want to talk to you a little bit about the U.S. pyrotechnic industry. That epicenter is in the great state of Alabama. As we prepare for America's 250 this summer, the president and I actually discussed this, the importance of ensuring that communities across the country have access to the fireworks they needed for the historic occasion, to make sure that we can all celebrate our country from coast to coast. And in doing that, I just want to confirm that the administration is committed to maintaining the fair treatment for our U.S. firework companies, especially as they work to meet the nation's needs and in front of this big date.
Thank you, Senator, for your comments on Mexico. And then this, earlier this year, the U.S. tariffs on China were quite high, at 140%, which was a result of Chinese retaliation. That was brought down significantly, and I remember having conversations at the time with our firework vendors, and that was something that they were very happy to see that come down. We'll continue to stay engaged with them. I know they've engaged with the White House to make sure we get a sense of where they are on all this, and that we can have the fireworks we need to celebrate.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. The next issue I'd like to highlight concerns specialized equipment and that procurement. I briefly touched on this with Secretary Lucknett when he was here in front of the subcommittee, but as we work to onshore and significantly expand domestic capacity in sectors ranging from steel to aluminum to pulp, paper, auto manufacturers, et cetera, we know that many of the companies face time-sensitive procurement needs for specialized industrial equipment, much of which has limited sourcing ability at this time. How is USTR ensuring predictability and affordability and the access to these essential manufacturing equipment that's required for these plants to expand?
Certainly. So what I would say, first of all, we need to always take a step back and understand what the president is doing is he's reshoring manufacturing. Right. The fact that we have to be reliant on other countries for the very equipment to manufacture is really disturbing and reflects.
It makes the point.
And it reflects decades of bad policy. We've heard from some companies. I personally meet with a lot of stakeholders who talk about this issue, and I'm happy to meet with any you have that have concerns.
Okay, excellent. And do you have guidance that you're providing those companies specifically, or just kind of a case-by-case basis, taking time with them?
It's case-by-case. Again, the president's program is not a program that gives out tons of exclusions, right? If you have a program to fix the deficit and you give exclusions, you don't fix the deficit. And so we have an open door to these companies to talk about their specific issues.
Thank you. We'll definitely follow up. The next issue is about ensuring products manufactured here remain fully competitive. And so it's kind of a little bit of a similar question. But for example, we have a major manufacturer in Huntsville whose tariff exposure on imported parts and components, which support their actual U.S. production, sometimes the tariff sometimes is higher than the tariff impact faced by foreign competitors on an actual finished good. And so I know this is something that you and your team have been working on and are considering carefully. And so I tell you, I appreciate that and certainly welcome any update that you have on how you're approaching that to just help ensure that domestic manufacturers are able to compete in the market across the world.
Yeah, thank you. I would say, one of the things we've done in President Trump's tariff program is those countries that tend to dump the most, whether it's Vietnam or others in Asia, they have the highest tariffs to help create a level playing field.
And as you continue to iron that stuff out, if there's anything that we can give you that would be helpful, please let us know. And then last question, when it comes to cotton, so Alabama is at the heart of the Southeast Cotton Belt, and so 59 out of 67 of our counties are cotton-producing counties. And we produce higher quality cotton than anyone around the world, but our growers are still seeing less demand than ever before, in large part to illegal market practices, and you've alluded to this in other questions, but implemented by our adversaries to gain a competitive advantage. On top of this, we see China continuing to flood the market with cheap synthetic products and just further creates a divide here. And so just a quick question for you, because I know here in Congress we're working on it. We see Chair Bozeman and Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith lead an effort on buying American cotton. I'm proud to be a part of that effort. But what conversations are you having at USTR in this regard, and in what ways do you think that we can encourage the consumption of American cotton through our trade policies?
So one of the things we've done, we recently reached agreements with El Salvador and Guatemala, who are key parts of the U.S. textile industry. And so we have really agreed to preferential treatment for them so that we really support that supply chain, which depends largely on U.S. cotton, as opposed to supply chains for other parts of the world that aren't using U.S. cotton.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Look forward to working with you and appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, Senator Brent. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Ambassador. All through my state of Rhode Island and all through the nation, what we hear when we go out is families are suffering under accelerating prices for practically everything. Since January until this October, appliances, for example, have gone up 4.25%, electricity 5.6%, ground beef 13.87%, and for many families that's a staple. Milk 2.48%, and coffee 30.2%. Goldman Sachs estimates that the tariffs are being paid for 55% by American consumers and 22% by American businesses, which probably pass on some of that to consumers. So in this situation in crisis for many families, the president seems to be completely indifferent to what's going on in the average family in the United States.
Well, Senator, I think accusing the president of being completely indifferent, I think is not accurate at all. We
Really?
talk about this a lot. I mean, some of the biggest things that have happened is housing, healthcare, education. All these things skyrocketed during the Biden administration. We're trying to fix them. Fortunately, we do have a lot of things over the past 12 months, and I'm just looking at public information here. You have, we have apparel that's gone down by 0.1% over the past 12 months. But where we do see issues about beef, the president's launched an affordability program. The herd's at the smallest it's been in 10 years. Some of these things have secular trends, so we're aware of it. We want to work with you on it.
Well, that's interesting. Let's talk about coffee. 30% increase. One of the major coffee producers is Brazil. The President of the United States put tariffs on Brazil because his friend, President Bolsonaro, was being prosecuted under the law of Brazil. Do you think that's a valid reason to impose tariffs on a country that results in significantly increased hires for American families?
So, Senator, IEEPA has regularly been used over the years by presidents of both parties to deal with foreign policy issues, whether it's abuse of law or human rights issues. And in addition, with Brazil, they tried to force American companies to self-censor. They detained Americans.
Excuse me, the president himself admitted that he was doing this because of Bolsonaro, demanded that they cease prosecuting him under law. So, in your view, it would be completely appropriate for another country to go in and slap tariffs on the United States if someone was being prosecuted that they liked.
The United States of America, including presidents of both parties, have used IEEPA to take stronger action. They've used it to cut off trade with countries where they think that the judicial systems are abused. The president didn't take that strong an action. He did tariffs instead of cutting off all trade. But we have all kinds of examples where former presidents have cut off trade entirely because we think that the judicial...
What are those former examples?
I mean, we've cut off, trade with Iran and
we
sanctioned individuals
because they were trying someone
that
was a friend of the United States. We cut off trade with Iran because they were engaged in violent activities.
But we have sanctions on specific people in Mexico, who's a neighbor. We have have sanctions on specific individuals in countries all over the world. I mean, all presidents have used IEEPA to do sanctions. The president has actually not gone as far as a full cutoff, but has just, imposed tariffs.
The president gratuitously, for his own self-gratification, imposed tariffs on Brazil because one of his buddies was in trouble. Now, let's change subjects. Yesterday, the White House announced that NVIDIA is going to be allowed to export the H200 chips to China. Were you consulted on that?
I was.
You agreed?
I agree with the president.
Did anyone in the National Security Administration, the Department of Defense, National Security Council, were they consulted?
So I'm not going to disclose the internal deliberations of the White House on this, Senator.
Well, let me tell you, every professional military officer that I've talked to about this thinks it is detrimental to the security of the United States to provide these chips to China. That this is a gross breach of his responsibility as the Commander-in-Chief to ensure that this country is protected. And I think you should be consulting with the national security experts. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador, thank you for coming today. I represent the state of New Hampshire, and Canada is New Hampshire's largest trading partner. In 2024, New Hampshire businesses exported $1.2 billion in goods to Canada. Many of our businesses in the state have been hurt by tariffs and loss of business from Canada. One small business that I've visited stands out in particular because when the president announced the tariffs and got into the back and forth with Canada, that business lost 85% of its wholesale sales. It went from 15 employees down to 2. And when I visited the small business, he wanted to ask some questions of the president, so I'm going to ask those questions of you. He said, "What do you want me to do? If you, meaning if you, the president, the administration, really care about your country, why don't you support small businesses, which are the backbone of every community?" I think this is a serious issue because every business that I've visited in New Hampshire has not only been concerned about the cost of the tariffs on their business, but also about the uncertainty that has surrounded them, which has made a real impact. The U.S. is in its 9th straight month of contraction in manufacturing and has lost manufacturing jobs every single month since Liberation Day. So, what should I say on behalf of the administration to the small manufacturers who are seeing their input costs going up, who aren't big tech companies that can get access to the president to get an exemption, but who are dealing with the on-the-ground impact of these tariffs?
So I would, first of all, I'm happy to talk to your constituents if helpful to get more information. There are not tariffs on goods that travel across the border between Canada and the United States if they are Canadian and American goods. That if they comply with the USMCA rules, which President Trump set up, and Senate agreed to, they're not subject to a tariff. So if they're getting goods that are not made in Canada but made in China or somewhere else and they're bringing them across, then yes, we have tariffs on China and other places. So I'd be happy to talk to
let's
them.
talk about USMCA. I know that it was raised earlier. Unfortunately, I wasn't here, but can you talk about how current negotiations are going with Canada over tariffs and over reauthorizing USMCA, where those negotiations are and when you expect them to finish and what challenges you're seeing come up?
Sure. So we just concluded our public consultation process. That was a couple months long, where we received comment. We just had 3 days of hearings where civil society and industry and workers can come in and give their views. So we've received a lot of input from agricultural community, manufacturers, service providers, et cetera. A lot of people like a lot of the things that USMCA has done. A lot of folks are concerned if Mexico or Canada haven't been compliant. So we're in the process right now of developing areas where we think the agreement should be improved or should be fixed. The president himself is also considering what the future of this agreement looks like. I speak to my counterparts in Canada and Mexico pretty much weekly. I think it's incumbent on us, and I intend to work with Congress and have been and will on positions on USMCA renegotiation, so we can have a good sense. I think rules of origin need to be addressed because I want to make sure that the benefits of the agreement go to the members of the agreement and not some third country in Asia somewhere. So that's something where I want to focus. And if there are ongoing irritants with Canada and Mexico, those need to be resolved too.
And so are you confident that this is going to get done by the expiration date for the reauthorization?
So the way it works is on July 1, the administration has to say if they're going to stay in the agreement or not. If they say no, then there's an ongoing negotiation process that goes on. If they say yes, then you still have the opportunity to revise and renegotiate things. My expectation is that in January I'll be sitting down with the Canadians and then with the Mexicans, maybe separately, just to talk to them separately about what it looks like going forward.
More and more countries now seem to see China's export-driven beggar-thy-neighbor policies as a threat. When I've traveled internationally, countries have been clear that they want to do more business with the U.S. and not with China, which I think is a good thing. Excuse me, last month Goldman Sachs updated their forecast to show that more economic growth in China is actually hurting growth in the rest of the world. So can you talk about your objectives to build a cohesive global partnership to combat China's economic policies, and what are the results that you're seeing from that?
So I read that report too. One thing we've been doing over the past several months is we've been concluding agreements on reciprocal trade with countries on a bilateral basis, and this is a situation where we modify our tariffs somewhat. We still keep a tariff to protect domestic production, but we modify it somewhat to make sure that we can get products from those countries that we want, that we need, and they in turn are opening their markets to us so that we can be stronger partners, so we can have more balanced trade. We obviously have a trade deficit issue, so we don't want to just continue to be the dumping ground or have others have workarounds into third countries. But we've been quite successful, and these agreements, they have commitments from other countries on tariffs, on non-tariff barriers, on digital trade, on economic security, and commercial opportunities. So that's exactly what we're doing, Senator. I'm happy to talk to you in more detail about what we've achieved.
I know I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, but if I could just do a quick follow-up, because I think my understanding is that there have been about 20 deals that have been done and that we've only seen actual text for 2 of them. Do you have any idea when we're going to see the details on the rest of those deals?
Sure. So first of all, for some of them, we've not to get too much in the weeds, we've uploaded them onto the system where members and staff can review some of the negotiating text. So some of that is available for your review already. And then we expect to publish additional agreements, the full text within the coming weeks. I know that's a little bit of a vague answer, but we're finalizing many of them right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ambassador, again, thank you for your presence here this afternoon. A couple of things I want to add to what you've been asked. First of all, let me start with agriculture. And the challenge, I think, is that at least when it comes to soybeans and grain sorghum, China is such a significant purchaser, or has been historically, that it's hard to overcome that with other trade agreements on a bilateral basis. But where are the greatest opportunities for agriculture if you were taking a trade mission and you're a farmer or farm group in Kansas, I mean, India is one that comes to mind, particularly for grain sorghum, and yet it's such a difficult country to crack. What is your plan? How do you overcome and China complicates the need for agriculture producers in Kansas and across the country to be able to sell their commodities to China complicates the issues that you face in trying to get a trade agreement, a better trade agreement with China. Rare earth minerals is certainly a component of that, but in addition to that, in the United States, that purchase of those commodities is critical to the economy of many rural states.
We have to remember and keep in mind that China's economy is like a square and ours is like a circle, and they just don't fit together well all the time. And so we have to find a way to manage that trade. And I know that our farmers would love to just have free, unfettered access into every market in the world, and we're achieving that with a lot of markets, right? Right now, which is great. You know, with China, they have a different system. They're probably not going to change their entire system for us, but they know they benefit from having our soybeans. You know, I know they like to buy from Brazil, but they need our beans too. They need our sorghum. They need all of this, and so it makes sense to have purchase arrangements with them. Because it's a way to kind of have a square and a circle go together. So for sure we believe that. We also think that it's helpful to diversify, and that's why Vietnam has already reduced its tariffs for us on soybeans, and they can go a little lower on that. Cambodia's already reduced theirs. You mentioned India. I have a team over there right now as we speak in New Delhi working on this. There's resistance in India to certain row crops and other meats and products. They're, like you said, they're very difficult nut to crack. I agree with that 100%, but they've been quite forward-leaning. The type of offers they've been talking to us about have been the best we've ever received as a country. So I think that's a viable alternative market. And then we talk about there are biofuels. There are other countries that want biofuels that can be derived from soybeans. So we're trying to kind of touch every base in every country to make sure we can be diversified. And of course, we want to maintain that relationship with China. They need our product and we want to sell it.
You touched on one of my points that was going to be is that biofuels is another component of how we can export agriculture commodities. And it has the advantage of having some processing jobs created by the creation of biofuels. I'd also highlight, I chair a caucus in the Senate on SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, another opportunity within the biofuels realm. What's the prognosis on ethanol and other biofuels, soy diesel and others in the global economy as far as trade?
Well, certainly with ethanol, that's been an area of broad market access. We have a huge new quota that we've obtained in the United Kingdom. We have a lot of other countries who, during our negotiations, have agreed to open their markets for U.S. ethanol. So that's a big win. With SAF, we have the European Union that has agreed to a commitment to buy $750 billion in U.S. energy products over the next few years. That includes oil and gas, but also anything else like biofuel or SAF. So there are, and that's a major market, obviously.
This is certainly outside USTR, but the photo that's behind me came from a number of years ago when I was in Kensington, Kansas, and driving down a street called Railroad Avenue, which normally in small towns lend itself to going by the grain elevator. I could hardly see the grain elevator because of the grain sorghum that is piled on the ground because there's no space in the elevator. This was and is now returned to be the circumstance in communities across Kansas. And so it highlights the magnitude of what we have to sell and how important your job is. Again, the part that is outside your realm, but as an advocate for farmers that you are, I would highlight the importance of food aid programs. USDA has those, Food for Peace, McGovern-Dole. legislation that Senator Hove and I are involved in bring that program into the Department of Agriculture from USAID and the State Department. We're trying to find the right place in this administration in which feeding hungry people around the globe has a future. And I would encourage you to advocate as you have conversations with the Department of Agriculture or the State Department that there is more that can be done outside of trade agreements than is being done in feeding people who are hungry and or starving. And I think the last number I knew that our feeding hungry people globally represented about 13% of the market of commodities in the United States. 13% in today's world is not an inconsequential figure. And all I'm asking of you is that in your discussions within the administration, would you please highlight the opportunity that can be made outside USTR as far as what is a market for agriculture commodities grown in the United States, and it has the additional moral component of feeding people who are hungry.
I will do that, and I'll try to be even more concrete and have my staff talk to yours to make sure that there's an actual concrete path forward on this, right?
That'd be very useful. Let me see. I thank you for, you told me you would do something and you did it time and time again. And it is easy to talk about soybeans, but I want to make sure that grain sorghum was included. And watching your press release and your press comments in Southeast Asia, you were there to highlight the importance of grain sorghum. And then, in addition to an agricultural state, we got a number of things, how we earn a living in Kansas, but one of the significant ones is aviation. And you have, in your negotiations in the past with the United Kingdom, with South Korea, Japan, the European Union, you've established the zero for zero tariffs that was created in a 1979 agreement. You've continued that practice, that policy, and I want to encourage that to continue as you negotiate with India or Brazil or Singapore. Can you provide me an update and your thought process on the continuation of the 1979 agreement? Again, I would highlight that aerospace is one of the, perhaps the best, but one of the best in which we have the ability to export a lot more than we import. And the parts and relationships that we have, particularly under USMCA with Canada and Mexico in aviation, remain hugely important.
Yes, as you know, I lived in Wichita, the air capital, so this is a sector that's important to me. And as we've gone through and we've accomplished our trade deals with countries, this is an area where we've agreed to give them, no reciprocal tariff. Again, recognizing the 1979 agreement and this status of the industry in America as a net exporter. With Brazil, India, Singapore, we don't have deals yet with these countries. With India, it's fairly far advanced. In my expectation, we can certainly talk about extending treatment to those countries as well if they're willing to play ball and come to the table and give the United States the market access it should have.
If something's renegotiated with in regard to USMCA, it would be a trade agreement subject to Senate ratification?
I think if you're changing U.S. law, yes. I mean, if I'm just having unilateral concessions from other countries, there's nothing for Congress to do on that front. But if there's something where we have to come to Congress to have you vote on it, that's what we have to do to make it happen. And
let me turn to the subject of this hearing, USTR's budget request. Your budget request in FY26, we had a difficult time in the budgetary process, the appropriations process, because the administration was new and getting its budget together. And that request was for $95 million. That's $15 million above what we marked our bill to be at $80 million. But it's still the largest increase. As you said, you've been flatlined. So this subcommittee and the full committee have, in terms of the history, have significantly increased the amount of money available at USTR. I wanted to give you the opportunity to explain to this subcommittee why that request is appropriate and what the money is important for.
Certainly, it's really, and again, as I mentioned, I don't do grants, I don't do loans, et cetera. It's really salaries, travel, expenses, and it's split into two buckets. We have our normal operating budget, and then we have something called the Trade Enforcement Trust Fund that Congress created in 2015 to signify the importance of enforcement. And so, for example, when it comes to just critical staffing for tariff and trade exports, we need an additional 10 full-time employees to help do this, and we estimate that to be just over $5 million. When it comes to enforcement staff, because we're going around the world getting all kinds of great concessions for our manufacturers, for our agriculture producers and our workers and our service providers, but we have to enforce it. We have to monitor and make sure it's accomplished. So we need 9 additional employees there, and that's about $6 million. And then the trust fund itself, we'd asked for an additional $8 million too. Right, we're dealing with China, second largest market in the world. I've been hearing for years and years during my time in the trade field that we have to enforce, and that means we actually have to have people who monitor the situation, who work with folks on the ground, and then who can take action. And we have to do all this research, and we have to draft the actions, we have to take the actions, we have to execute. It's policy experts, it's attorneys, it's industry folks. And again, these are career folks. I'm not asking for more political slots. These are career people who know the trade, who know what they're doing. And it's been flat for 5 years, and we've never been busier. I'm negotiating with dozens and dozens of countries. We're trying to enforce these agreements we've made to protect American supply chains as we enter into a period of geopolitical uncertainty. And we have to have these supply chains. To many senators' points, we have to have tariffs, and I know people, disagree on how they're deployed, but I think I've heard, today that we have to have them in some way, and I have to have people to do it, so I can do it strategically, so I can do it in a nuanced way.
I myself, over the years, have said we have trade agreements that seem to be good when we approve them, but they have to be enforced. And so that point resonates with me. And you have, assuming that confirmation occurs as expected here in the next few days, you'll have a chief ag negotiator on board. You have instructions for her day one that she's going to accomplish and solve.
I do, and fortunately, she's a longtime career staffer who knows the business, knows the community, knows the countries, and she's already been hard at work. She'll of course have added authority when she's confirmed. One of the things I've asked them to look at is what about Brazil, right? I've heard a lot about Brazil today and who they are as a trading partner, but we have to remember in terms of ag, they're a competitor. And not just ag, aerospace, all kinds of things. They are a competitor. And every time someone retaliates against us, Brazil tends to do the backfill. So there are a lot of things to solve here. And our ag negotiator, she's ready for the job.
This is it. Thank you, Ambassador. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple points. First, I want to second the chairman's comments about the programs we've had in place to help feed hungry people around the world. I think they really do advance our own interests as well as prevent starvation. I'm still upset that they blew up AID, but I look forward to finding ways to get that help around the world until we get AID back at some point. Second, I do want to emphasize the point Senator Reid made, which builds on my earlier point about I don't think we should be compromising our national security to advance a trade agreement. And I do believe that the decision the other day to allow NVIDIA to send the H200 chips to China undermines our national security. And we had a hearing in another committee recently that talked about the dangers of undoing the rule, the affiliates rule that we discussed during my earlier question. So I just hope that we can work on those issues going forward. With respect to the $12 billion and the $28 billion during the last administration, I mean, you agree that this is the cost to America of the trade war with China, right? I mean, that's been that tab is being picked up by American taxpayers in one form.
Well, China has weaponized trade with the United States. You know, last year Congress appropriated $10 billion for farmers because they had, you know, a large crop. This year they had a large crop. So, you know, for better or for worse, this body will occasionally appropriate money to take care of these issues.
Just, Mr. Ambassador, it was a simple question, right? In the first Trump administration, U.S. taxpayers put up $28 billion. I don't know, the chairman's chart's missing, because of the surplus agricultural produce that we didn't export to China, right?
If China targets our farmers, we're going to take care of them, and we're not going to sit down while China does everything. I know people want the status quo; they want to trade with China and be dependent.
Mr. Ambassador,
but we don't accept it.
Right. So here's I'm looking at a chart from the American Farm Bureau, and you know, back in 2018 during the first, you know, Trump trade negotiations, obviously our exports for soybeans took a huge hit. Now they're taking a big hit now. My only point is that American taxpayers are footing the bill for that, now $12 billion. And so then the question is, what do we get for it, right? What does China give? And I know during the first Trump administration, one of the things they committed to, supposedly, was increased imports of American goods. But it's a fact, is it not, that they only made good on 59% of the purchases promised?
And Senator, you and I both know it's because President Biden refused to enforce the agreement. He refused. The first year of that agreement, the Chinese purchased more ag than they had in years and years, and President Biden refused to enforce it.
Mr. Ambassador, this was the promise they made while Trump was back in office during those terms. So you're saying that while President Trump was in office in his first term, China complied with the agreement to purchase those goods?
They were compliant. They had their highest purchases of ag.
If you look at a chart, you'll see that they
and President Biden just laid down and let them do whatever they wanted.
Actually, President Biden, as you know, kept the tariffs on. So let's go to...
I credit him for that. I credit him for that.
Well, I mean, he kept the tariffs on, so he didn't lay down and get rolled over. The reality is that China didn't fulfill its commitments under the previous agreement negotiated by the Trump administration. And I don't know what the Trump administration is prepared to do about it. I don't know what you're prepared to do if they don't follow through on the 12 million metric tons. But here's a question on the Japan deal, because we hear these grand announcements, right, after these deals about commitments countries have made. I just want to make sure I understand the commitment on the Japan deal, because Japan, as you know, already is the largest foreign investor in the United States, right? $819 billion, I'm told, as of last year, Japanese companies have invested in the United States, $819 billion.
They're a large investor. The Koreans told me they were bigger last year, but I'll credit you. They're a huge investor.
So I want to make sure I understand. You're saying that under the new Japan trade deal, Japan's committed to invest another $550 billion in the United States before the end of President Trump's term. Is that correct?
That's what they've committed to do. That's right.
So you're saying that by the end of the term, they're going to be up to $1.3 trillion in investment.
They will invest an additional $550 billion over the next 3 years.
I mean, we don't know what they would have invested anyway in addition to that, but it'll be interesting to see how we monitor that. So how are we going to monitor that? I've been reading about through this EO, this special, you know, task force that's going to be set up, and then after these Japanese companies or investors, you know, get their full principal returned, the United States government is going to get 90% of the profits. Is that right?
The Commerce Department is monitoring and implementing those investment commitments. At USTR, we're not doing that. You know, if the Commerce Department reports to us that they're not compliant, then we can look at, you know, seeing if the deal needs to hold. But it needs to be monitored. I agree with you.
Well, you guys cut the deal, right?
The Commerce Department was quite focused on the investment piece of this.
Okay.
I'm focused on tariffs, non-tariff barriers.
Okay. We look forward to it. I hope the chairman will agree that, you know, if we're going to go make these statements about what these agreements are going to produce for the American people, it is very important that we hold them accountable for those purposes. In the interest of time, I'm not going to ask the questions directly about your role, office, also as the head of the Office of Special Counsel, but I would request that you and your team answer some questions for the record, because if you're willing to.
We're happy to do so. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ambassador, thanks for being here. Thanks for your great work. Really appreciate it. Yesterday, I was at the White House. We had a roundtable with President Trump and Secretary of Ag, Brooke Rollins, and announced the $12 billion assistance, the bridge, for our farmers until we get to the enhancements in the one big beautiful bill that we made, which includes enhanced crop insurance and updated ARC PLC counter-cyclical safety net, which is going to make a big, big difference for our farmers, but we got to get there. And again, President Trump and Secretary Rollins stepped up and provided that bridge. That sends not only a really important message to our farmers, but it sends a really important message to China that they're not going to put pressure on us by going after our farmers. And the President and Secretary Besant and USTR Trade Ambassador Jamieson Greer are fighting for our farmers and ranchers and markets overseas. And we really appreciate that, and I want to thank you and make sure that people understand that you're the one that's fighting to make sure that these trade agreements are enforced and that we get better terms for our farmers and ranchers and our other exporters as well, and that you are all about getting a level playing field, whether it's the tariffs that we face or the non-tariff barriers put on to us. How about China devaluing their currency and all these things that you are out there fighting for us and for our exporters, for our farmers, for our ranchers, for our processors, for our manufacturers, for everybody. That's the fight you're fighting. And by the way, when I talked to Scott Besant yesterday, he said you are a walking encyclopedia. So I'm glad to hear that, and I would have to agree with him on that.
Well, thanks. Next time I'm going to have you draft my opening remarks, Senator, and I'll just read them.
So I just want to make clear, we appreciate that you're out there fighting for us, and I think sometimes that isn't fully understood. Now, obviously, we want sales and we want them executed. When we look at, for example, China, and we're talking about 12 million metric tons, initially 12 million metric tons for this season, and this is the 25 crop year, right? And then it ramps up to the 25 million metric tons for the following crop year. Walk us through what the timing of the sales will be for soy with China, but then also kind of with these other countries. So I'm really talking about the execution now, because you're booking sales, but the key is the execution and the timing now. And give us some, both whatever specificity you can give us now, and then tell us how you can get us more so we can kind of deal with that uncertainty that some of our farmers are facing, and that helps us with markets as well.
Sure. So again, thank you, and I appreciate your support and the conversations we've had. It's always helpful. With China, it's 12 million metric tons through the rest of this growing season, right, which tends to end in February or March, kind of depending on those sales. And then it's 25 million per growing season for the next 3 years.
So that's an important point right there for our farm, right? If these get executed, say before the end of March, that 12 million metric tons, and then we're already into the next 25, that's like 37 million within not a whole lot more than a year, right?
That's right, yes.
It's important for people to understand that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And then on top of that, as you mentioned, we've had commitments from other countries to buy, soybeans, but also corn and wheat and sorghum and other things. And we've already seen, the first shipment of certain row crops to Bangladesh that first we've seen it in years. We have Korea and Japan who've made these commitments. And so, we have our ag team who tracks all of these things. And if they're not done, then, we'll enforce. I will say more important, China aside, doing purchase agreements with China is important just because of the way their economy works. But with these other countries, we want the purchase agreements, but we want structural, constant access so that the farmers and the ranchers can have kind of regular market access and establish the relationships that are going to give them that continuity and certainty you're looking for.
Yeah, 90% of the soybeans we export from North Dakota, for example, are IP, identity preserved, and they go to China. And those are long-standing relationships, so you're right on there. I want to bring up Brazil. We hear about beef and other things, but for example, Brazil is dumping sugar over quota into our market. They have forced sugar prices for our producers down 42%. 42%, okay? But if you go in the store, it's flat. Flat. Okay, so this is an example of where we need to enforce our agreement for our sugar producers, because once they wipe us out, then they can push it right back up. This is, anti-competitive trade dumping 101. So what can we do about that?
Well, as I was mentioning to the chairman, I see Brazil as a major competitor in the agricultural space.
Right on.
And they have a lot of practices in Brazil that undermine our farmers, whether it's in export markets or right in home. Sugar is famously managed trade, right? It's rarely free trade in sugar. We have programs in the U.S., quotas, et cetera, to manage that. I'm happy to look at a closer level. This is a little bit I haven't gone into details on the effect of Brazilian dumping here in this market, but we can work with USDA to see what we can do about controlling that flow.
The last thing I'd bring up, and again, I appreciate both the chairman and ranking member for setting this up, opportunity to talk to you about the important work you're doing in trade, and that is on the Food for Peace. So as Chairman mentioned, we've worked to reform the program that was badly needed. We support for Food for Peace, but it needs to support U.S. national interests, which was not happening with USAID, and state needs to have a hand in that. We've worked the process through state as far as, how the food aid can and should go, Food for Peace and PL 42. And so now it should be over to ag. I guess the question is, are you involved in advancing that? And is that under your purview as well, or is that just something we need to continue to work with state and USDA on?
So I don't have a direct hand on it, but sometimes I get looped into these kinds of things. So, and we're happy to talk to you. I'm happy to help play an organizing role in the White House, talk to state and USDA to make sure we have concrete path forward on these things.
Well, we did two things. In Ag Appropes, we set it up for a one-year review, which I think is helpful, and something that our chairman of this committee wanted to do. Gives us a one-year time frame to kind of work on it. I think one of the concerns is moving some of the existing aid for this year out while we're working on that reorganization. So I guess if you have any insight into that, or somebody on your staff does, we'd want to touch base with them.
We're happy to help.
Okay. Again, thank you for the very important work that you're doing.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Ranking Member.
I think we're about done. Let me use my usual practice of asking you, Ambassador, you the witness, if there's anything that you wish you hadn't said, anything you wish you...
I wish I hadn't said?
Anything that you want to make sure that we hear based upon the totality of the questions that you've been asked, and any thoughts that came to you while you were sitting there?
Sure, and I'll have to, you get a lawyer talking and they don't stop talking. I think the point I want everyone to take away is that we can't just keep the status quo. Okay, if we continue the type of trade policy and the global trade system we've been working under for decades, then we'll continue to have the result we have, which is that all the manufacturing has gone to China and Vietnam and elsewhere, and that all of our manufacturers and all the 70,000 factories we lost following NAFTA and WTO accession of China, none of that will change. So we have to have a change, and it would be wonderful to have years and years to develop the ideal trade and industrial policy and then implement over several years. We don't have that kind of time. The Biden administration, they did a lot of studies on critical supply chains, which I thought were interesting, and I read them. And to the ranking member's point, President Biden kept the tariffs, on China. We have to move forward. We have to take action. I am constantly trying to find ways to calibrate the tariff program. The president is too. He had an interview yesterday where he talked about the possibility of calibration. We're going on a country-by-country basis to open markets, to export more. That helps achieve balance. We're trying to use tariffs to control the import flow so we don't have this giant deficit that drives offshoring. I can't control other countries. I can influence them if I have leverage, which is what tariffs give me. They protect our industry, but they also give me leverage, and that's why we keep some of the tariffs and we take some of them off. And we're going country by country. If you look at the program that's been established, the highest tariffs are in China and Asia and Vietnam and these places where there's a lot of overcapacity. And it's not about being anti-China or anti-anybody. It's about being pro-American, pro-American worker. And kind of the farther you get away from that locus of overcapacity, the lower the tariffs get. Do we have tariffs on our allies, Japan, Korea, EU? Yeah, sure we do. They have giant surpluses with us that that many exist because of non-market practices. It's not because Europe's competitive. They have terrible policy when it comes to energy and regulation and all this stuff. It's because they have unfair trade practices. And by the time you get to the Western Hemisphere, that's where we have the lowest tariffs. And that's not a mistake. That's strategic. That's where we want to have a lot of our supply chains. So we need to get to a world where we have trade, but the trade is managed, it's balanced, it's for the benefit of American workers and producers. We have to have that, because if we just keep going with the status quo, it's not going to work. We're not going to get to a situation where we can weather whatever geopolitical storms are coming. Anyway, maybe I'm a little dramatic, but this is what we're trying to do. It's what we are doing.
No, I indicated over a long period of time that we needed trade agreements but we also need them enforced. But the other corollary to that was we need fair trade. And I would just highlight the importance of the non-tariff barriers. When we negotiate trade agreements, it's not just, the most important part may not just be the percentage of the tariff. It may be or the non-tariff issues that are keeping our products out, even if we have no tariff at all. And so others have been very successful in finding ways of keeping American products out of their economies, out of their country, even though the tariffs could be the same. Mr. Ambassador, anything else?
No, thank you for your time. Appreciate your questions and happy to work with any of you on anything.
Thank you for your time and your presence here today. This hearing will be concluded in a moment. First of all, we'd indicate that members of the committee may submit written questions to you. We would ask that they do so very rapidly, and